Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White. This is the LinkedIn Live program for pre-sales professionals and pre-sales leaders. And these are live conversation, folks. We are coming to you live here at noon in the Eastern time zone of the United States. And as I like to say, these conversations are unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And today's guest is Kalyani Tavisala. She's a senior sales engineer with UIPath. She's got over, or almost, I'm going to say almost a decade of experience in pre-sales. She's someone that I've gotten to know through a number of conversations. Very excited to have her on the call. We are going to be talking about expanding the definition of pre-sales. Before we dive into it, Kalyani, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Chris, and thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled and excited to be here with you and the audience that has tuned in.
Super. Excellent. And by the way, folks, we don't see you out there. So if you are out there and you care to say hello, please feel free to do so. If you have a question for Kalyani or myself, of course, I welcome you to ask. Now, Kalyani, I just introduced you as a senior sales engineer with UiPath. By the way, a company that I've done some work with. So have a great deal of respect and admiration for your organization. Do you mind introducing yourself a little bit more broadly and talk a little bit about how you got into this profession and a little bit about your journey?
Yep, absolutely. I'm a pre-sales practitioner, and as a pre-sales practitioner, my role is to help our customers uncover value through technology solutions. That's exactly it. My name is Kalyani for anybody out there, and I'm so thrilled to be here to be having this conversation with Chris and the rest of you. I joined UiPath as a senior sales engineer quite recently. And prior to that, I was leading a team of sales engineers at WalkMe. And previously, I was both in field consulting and solutions consulting roles at Adobe and McAfee. So in these roles, what I've had the opportunity to do is be part of the entire customer journey, right? And experience both pre and post sales. And that's what I bring to the table when I'm in conversations with customers, solving those problems with the entire journey and experience in mind.
Love that. So and this is why these conversations are unpredictable and unrehearsed. You mentioned pre and post sales. So before we get into talking about expanding the definition of the understanding of pre-sales, do you mind just taking a minute when you think about the difference between a pre-sales role and a post-sales role? And I think the lines are blurring a little bit, but when you think about the different, what are some of the fundamental differences between the quote pre-sales role and post-sales role?
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right that the lines are blurring, and hopefully we'll go there in our conversation today in terms of how they are changing and what that means to us in the profession. But what I think the biggest difference, or the biggest, I shouldn't say difference, but what we do in pre-sales and what happens in post-sales, if what I think of pre-sales is really focusing on unlocking that value, right? You have a problem. You're coming to a vendor or a software company to say, I have a problem. We think you have the solution. How can we make sense of this, right? And in post sales, it's all about solving that problem. It's where the rubber meets the road, right? So that's the difference. It's actually, you're positioning it, you're presenting to the customer the value that they stand to gain with your technology solution that then gets passed on to your downstream teams, which is post-sale solutions, consulting services, whatever you have. And then they're then taking that and running with, okay, this is your need. And how do we unlock that value for you by implementing this and thereby solving your problem?
I absolutely love that. How has your perception of pre-sales evolved over this time? Because it sounds like you started out more, in a pre-sale, sort of both roles. It was maybe more of a true consulting role, probably doing a little bit of sort of pre-sales, maybe conversations, demonstrations, etc. But then you were supporting customers sort of post or once they'd onboarded. Did you have a certain perception of pre-sales yourself when you first got into this role, and has that evolved over that time?
It has. It definitely has, right? As I grew and matured both personally and professionally, I think and keeping in mind where we were, like, let's say 5, 6, 7 years ago, which is you get brought in to solve a very specific thing. Hey, here's the problem, you do your thing, and then you're off the picture or you're not in the scene anymore. I think the way things are happening today, and I think there are areas that I think are still works in progress, so to speak. But what is happening today is not so much the being in that one place and doing your thing and moving on, but having, in addition to that, having a continuous mindset of how do you kind of maintain your relationship with the customer throughout. And by doing that, you're also then having to expand your skill set, right? It doesn't happen organically that you one day are doing this and then go and start to support customers in their conversations, in their questions. You're not necessarily implementing it, but you need to have the context, because you cannot add value without that context.
Amen. Well, and I really like what you're saying. So, because you're right, I think a lot of us, and I'm the first to admit, even myself, certainly, and I did get into this profession almost 20 years ago. So, at the time, things obviously were very, very different. But I think very much I had a mindset of bring me in when you need a technical presentation, a product demonstration, when you need someone to talk to the technical experts or the technical principals, etc. I'll parachute in, I'll sort of do my thing, and then I'll sort of just go on to the next one, and you carry from there. And I would say about 5 years into that part of my career, I discovered, I think, what you're suggesting, which is I really need to take some ownership of building the relationship with prospects and customers and helping them through the journey. If we want to have a long-standing relationship with customers, then we have to take ownership of developing those relationships and those partnerships. And that's really what I hear you saying, is that and you use the term the customer journey. We really need to be prepared to engage throughout the customer's journey, both before they initially become a customer and then long after, right?
Yep.
And I think that's, and therein lies this notion of pre-sales and post-sales sort of becoming very much blurred, right?
Yeah, one thing that I think is kind of an ongoing thing, and I am by definition, I consider myself a generalist, not a specialist, and I have a desire to know all that I can in terms of gaining that context, right? Depending on where you are in your pre-sales journey and depending on your environment, like let's say your company and how you do things, it may manifest as being able to do deeper research into those accounts. And if you don't have that context necessarily into those accounts, how are you gaining that context, right? Because that's the value you bring. At the end of the day, whether it's, after, before, it doesn't matter. Our customers have problems. They care about those problems getting solved. They don't care about that distinction. So
Right.
what role can you play when someone comes to you by way of that relationship that you have built and nurtured to maintain and continue to grow that relationship? That's all it is.
Love that. You mentioned you're a generalist and not a specialist. That's interesting. Do you mind elaborating a little bit on what do you mean by generalist versus specialist, number one, and then number two, was that an intentional decision you made, or is that just something that it just sort of happened that way?
I think it happened. It happened that way, and I think it happened that way because of the path that I've taken and all the different experiences that I've had over the years, right? It's not so much I've been in HR, I've grown in HR, I've then moved into pre-sales. It's not been that way. My experience has entirely been in the technology sector.
Okay.
Not in a specific product per se, but understanding the landscape of technology and how people come together to solve those problems. What are the different functions that are involved in servicing that customer, depending on their need?
Yeah.
That's what I mean by when I say, it's not specific to a technology. And I think it lends well to pre-sales, and it's kind of an ongoing debate within pre-sales as well, is, are you looking for an expert? Are you looking so much for someone who has hands-on experience and expertise and deep execution skills with a tool set, as opposed to someone with that mindset that can come in, apply a framework to solving problems, and then say, okay, here's what I think we need to keep in mind as we are thinking about solving this problem, not so much, here's the tool and here's how you solve it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And it's interesting. I mean, I haven't really given that much thought, but you're right. I think I wrongfully probably just assume that most sales engineers are some level of expert in either their field or a technology before getting into pre-sales. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Like yourself, I mean, it sounds like you were sort of an IT professional and you had a solid general understanding of whether that's architecture or engineering fundamental software fundamentals, et cetera. You weren't necessarily a deep expert in one specific product, but I think this goes in line with kind of what we're talking about. I think the personal skills, the interpersonal skills, the sales skills, right? The ability to communicate, that I think trumps some of the expertise that a lot of us feel like we have to have. Has that been your experience, that your ability to communicate, relate, and engage with people, that's really been more your strength in this profession?
Absolutely. That's exactly it. I don't get me wrong. You do need to have, when you're in front of your customer, your audiences, you do need to have a really good understanding of what is it that they're looking to get, and how are you going to provide them that experience. So the fact that you're not necessarily tied to a technology doesn't mitigate the need for you to bring that attitude and the skill set to deliver value.
Yeah. I love that. So Kalyani, and by the way, folks, I'm speaking to Kalyani Tavisala. She's a senior solution engineer or sales engineer. Do you call them sales engineer or solutions engineers?
At UiPath, it's sales engineer.
Sales engineer. Okay, that's what I thought. She's a senior sales engineer with UiPath. By all means, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to ask. When you and I were speaking not too long ago, one of the things that you said to me that really struck a chord was, Chris, I think we really need to expand the perception and expand the understanding of pre-sales. Now, when you said that, I guess my first question for you is, were you thinking in terms of how pre-sales professionals think about the profession? Were you thinking in terms of how sales people think about the profession? Were you thinking in terms of senior leadership, or D, all the above? Provide a little more context for what you were thinking around that.
Yeah, I think the obvious place there is sales professionals, our counterparts, who we are joined at the hip when we go in front of customers and talk about the problems and what we can do. But all of the above is I think where we kind of have an opportunity to drive our positioning, no matter where you are. And when I talk about sales counterparts, what I think about is, yes, you know where to engage me, you know that need, But I don't think sometimes it sort of is, is executed all that skillfully. How do we manage that? How do we collaborate in a way that we are playing off of each other and elevating one another, right? I think that's where the magic is, and that's where I think all of our effort goes into, right? It happens. In my experience, I've had the good fortune of working with a handful of sales professionals that really bring that dynamism to the interaction, both by way of their preparation and knowing exactly when and how they can provide the platform to you. And I really like that you brought the senior leadership aspect into this question as well. There is a growing recognition for what solution engineers do. Again, the value that we bring to the conversation by way of, we are tip of the spear in some of those earlier conversations with customers. So there is a lot that goes into being able to position something technically. But I think where we get confined to and boxed into is just that technical value, right? Not too long ago, when we were talking about how do we bring sales engineers into having those business value conversations, one of the concerns that was expressed was, are they able to have business conversations? Right? So what does that mean? So I think that is where where we are today, how we get perceived, and there is a gap in between. I think that's where the future, optimistically for me, our growth potential is.
I completely agree. And my next question, or the question that comes immediately to mind for me, hearing what you said, is what should we be doing? We as sales engineers, what should we be doing to help change that perception? Because, and I know I'm quote preaching to the choir here, as much as we would like to change maybe how sales professionals think about the pre-sales professional or the sales engineer professional, as much as we would like to change how leadership, we can only change ourselves.
Yes.
We only have control. We only have control over what we have control over, which is an obvious statement, but which is to say over what we do, what we say, how we function, how we operate, how we think. So what are some of the things that we as sales engineers can be and should be doing to really change that perception, both on the side of sales, our sales counterparts, and maybe of leadership?
Yeah, and that's a great question. That's something that I think is relevant, on top of mind for all of us practitioners and all of us performing in this capacity. I'll go to what you said: control the controllables. That's all you can do. That's where our power lies, and I think it lies also in strengthening and embracing our point of view. Right? What is it that we bring to the table, and how do we embrace that point of view fully? And by which I mean, we are often so narrowly focused, and I've certainly been guilty of this, on deals. Yes, that is the core focus of what we do, but there are these other kind of spokes of the hub, so to speak, right? Which is interfacing or interacting with marketing, our product team, engineering, depending on, how your organization is set up even. What are some of those levers that we can start to bring into our function and have clarity on that mission? And I think this is kind of one of the things where, when you go to a customer or when you talk about our organization, how we speak about the mission, I don't think we do as much about putting our mission out there, about how do we want to not only support, but also be strategic partners. By strategic partners, bringing that point of view, that expansive point of view, and not just, I'm going to do a demo and here's the customized demo and here's what is going to matter to customers. And I think when you start to do that, I think the value is going to kind of be broadcast. And I think what's going to get you the buy-in and visibility, I think.
Love that. Love that. Well, and I wrote down the word point of view because I think that's such a powerful term. And in fact, the thought that I had, and you said, um, stand by your point of view, the first thought that I had was have a point of view, right?
Yeah.
If for anybody who might be out there listening or catch the recording of this, I think so often people certainly newer to this profession, we're so focused on the sort of the low hanging fruit or the lowest sort of common denominator of our jobs, which is what, right? Well, we might sit through a discovery conversation here, here and there, and basically we give demos, right? We talk about the product, we talk about the solution, right? And we want to make sure we get our talk track right, and we can flow through the demo flawlessly. I mean, that's sort of the lowest sort of level, I think, of maturity in this profession. To really be viewed as a strategic partner, to be viewed as someone who adds more value, I think we need to develop points of view on how best to achieve what our solution is designed to help organizations achieve, right? And have a point of view, the best way to engage with customers, right?
Yep.
And the best way to engage in a sales process and support the buyer's journey, so that when our sales counterparts come to us, we have a point of view to stand by. Does that resonate with you, Kalyani?
That absolutely does. That absolutely does. And also, point of view can be also thought of as expanding that point of view as not just deal focus, but how do you communicate that value that you bring to the table? Because a lot goes into, just like we completely respect the craft of our sales counterparts, where we understand the pressure that they're under, whatever that they are thinking of when they go in front of customers, there is an equal, if not more, amount of work that goes into executing the technical side of the house or the deal, right? And that is informed by our point of view of where the product is today, what we are seeing our customers ask and respond and resonate with, and how are our customers realizing value from our said solution. If you don't have that combined point of view, then what you're presenting is going to be narrow.
Yeah, I so love that. And it reminds me of something that I've heard a number of people talking about, is, this notion that we are in a very unique position because we have presumably the product knowledge and experience, the technical experience, the industry experience, but we're also in the front lines talking to customers, right? We're hearing not only why customers are deciding to invest in our solutions, but why they're not, right? We're hearing the objections that people have. We're hearing the things that prospects or target customers are trying to achieve that maybe we can't address with our solution, or where our solution falls down. All the more reason to have a broader perspective, right? And we need to be in a position and take the initiative to bring information back to product, back to marketing, even back to sales. And to your point, we need to find our point of view and take a stance and find our voice, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious to ask you, as you reflect on the past, let's call it decade or so, are there certain milestones where you made a significant sort of shift in your thinking, or in the way you approached this profession, or the way you approached the job, that sort of really made sort of a significant step up for you?
That's a great question. I didn't necessarily think of milestones or what might have contributed to. I will say this, I think it's awareness of your own strength that sometimes you don't necessarily realize is what I think has made the difference for me. Which to go confidently and speak my point of view or say, this works, this doesn't work, and for this reason, or because of that, here's our recommendation, being able to express that, right? And the awareness point is that you are the best person on the call to position or to provide what your product can do.
Yeah.
So how are you able to leverage that and provide that to the customer and not necessarily hold back on? I think if John Kerr's book talks about different ways that we just sit back and maybe accept, right, without necessarily digging into. And the core of that also goes back to listening, being able to listen and listen and not listen to respond, right? So those are two things that I think have definitely helped me level up my game.
Yeah.
Do not be in your head so much.
Yeah. It's interesting that term self-awareness. I think it has surfaced a number of times, even when I've done these talks. I think there's a great deal of power in self-awareness, and I find what you just said to be very, very true, which is to say that I think a number of times sales engineers or people in this role, they might have a point of view, to use a term that we've used a couple of times, maybe specifically in the context of a conversation with prospects and customers, or maybe internally. And I think sometimes they are reluctant to share. Sometimes they're inclined to hold back. Why do you think that is? And how can those of anybody listening to this who might find themselves in that situation, how do you think they can break through
that? Excellent question. And I think this is where I would say it's both having having the courage to fail is absolutely key. And this is not easy. I have failed. I have bombed in front of customers. It's I've been in sessions where I've not known the exact thing to say, but the important thing here is to take the next step.
I love that.
If you don't do that, you don't cross that wall, or you don't know, you are not able to climb over that wall. The other side of that is, I think this is where leadership, your team, can play a big part. Recognize where your team is on that journey. Recognize what it is that they are struggling with, and how you can maybe provide positive reinforcement or boost that ability to take that risk.
Yeah. God, I love that. Yeah, and Kalyani, let me hit our pause button here, folks. I'm speaking to Kalyani Tavisala. She's a senior sales engineer with UIPath. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. You mentioned courage we need to have the courage to fail, and I do think that's where that maybe what gets in the way of us speaking our mind in certain circumstances, or the power to do so, is the fear of failure or the fear of looking bad. We're so concerned about our own credibility. And when I think about this role, I think it's so interesting because many of us come from more of a, like yourself, you come from more of a general sort of IT, maybe architecture or software engineering background. A lot of people come from industry expertise, and we don't necessarily, at least this was my case, I didn't necessarily think of myself as being a sales professional when I first got into this role. And in fact, I didn't even want to be classified as someone who was in sales because I'm the expert. Why did you struggle with that at all when you first got into this profession? And what did you do to become more at peace with this idea that you're in a selling profession?
I remember, early on in my career, attending a webinar or a seminar or something like that, where they talked about how we're all selling. And this was not a sales engineer or a sales conference. And at the time, it sounded odd. I'm like, I don't know what this person means. I know my job. I'm doing this. I don't know what selling is involved. But let's take a step back and think about it.
Yeah.
Where are we not selling?
Mm.
As we're having this conversation, we are discussing ideas to help sell what we do better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I think I'll go back to your previous question. What was the biggest roadblock for you? What was the turning point, or what changed your game? Is this conscious attempt and effort to move away from having all the answers, which is often how we're positioned, right? Oh, we're going to bring so and so, and they are the you will be amazed. They'll have all the answers.
They're the expert, and they'll have answers to all your questions.
Exactly. And that's an enormous amount of pressure. We don't know all the answers. Nobody knows those. I mean, you have a baseline. You go with those and you see what's coming at you, and you're figuring out, okay, what makes sense in this situation with all of the things that are in front of me. That's what I think has changed or moved the needle for me.
I want to double click on what you just said, because I think there's so much power in that. And here's my interpretation of what you just said, was that your success and really perception of being a sales engineer and your ability to engage with customers elevated dramatically the moment you stopped feeling like you had to have all the answers, the moment you stopped feeling like you had to be perfect, and accepted that, okay, I don't know is an okay response, right? And it's less about me knowing everything and more about me engaging with the customer in a way that's meaningful to them. Now, I added a lot more words than you shared, but that's what I'm hearing, is that the moment I shifted my focus from me being perfect to really focus on the customer, that's where you felt like that was a significant shift in your profession, in your career.
Absolutely. You said it really well, and the word that you used is perfect. Engaging. The focus is engaging with customers, not giving them all the answers. The focus is on making them feel heard and engaging with them.
It's interesting, as you well know. I mean, I work with a lot of organizations. I speak with a lot of SE leaders. I speak with a lot of SE teams. And there was a group that I was working with just last week, and there was one conversation in particular. I don't remember exactly which client, but in essence, we sort of went down this rabbit hole of being experts in our field and knowing. And somebody said something, and I said, look, the most important thing that we can do during a demonstration is demonstrate a thorough understanding of them and what they are trying to do, and how your solution is going to help them. But I guarantee you, if you can demonstrate a thorough understanding, and to your point, Kalyani, when they feel heard and understood, they will immediately begin to give you the benefit of the doubt and your product the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Can I share an example?
Please.
I remember this was, early on in my career, and one of those times when, customer back when there was no Zoom, and we picked up the phone, called them, talked to them.
Pre-COVID, basically.
Pre-COVID. So we did that, and I was talking to this customer, and we were supposed to meet earlier. He couldn't make it, and we just decided to connect after, and we just started talking. And I was like, okay, we didn't actually do this, but we have a meeting coming up. Can you share what your key things are? What would you like? What are you hoping to get out of that meeting? So I can make sure that you have those, we can cover those for you.
Yeah.
He talked for about 10 minutes or so, talking about all the different things. And I took a few minutes to recap that, right? And the response that I got from the customer was, you actually listened. Right. And that, I think, was one of the best moments of my career. Right? All that I did was, write down, or I have to take notes. I'm an avid note taker. I did that, and I just recapped. I didn't say anything different. I didn't add anything. I said, here's what you would like us to focus on. And I remember at the time, it was like, yes, I listened. I thought that was what this meeting was for. But I will say that was also one of those times when I think I was able to give them complete attention and engage with them. I've not always been able to do that.
Yeah.
Be the first person to say that. So how do you maintain that focus is really, really important.
I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing. And you're right. It seems, certainly to people like ourselves who have been doing this a long time and recognize the value of focusing on the client and putting your, as I like to say, clear the cache, right? We put our agenda aside and we really just tune in and listen to understand, and then can repeat that back to them to their satisfaction. It seems so obvious. And for those who have been doing this, a fair number of years, it probably is. But it's still striking to me how many times prospects and customers are almost caught off guard when the individual that they're talking to or talking with that represents a software, that represents a vendor, actually takes the time to listen and understand, which tells me that there are still a lot of people out there that aren't taking the time to truly listen and understand. And we talked about, we can only control what, ourselves, right? Control the controllable. That's a perfect example of something that's fully controllable. The more we can truly put our agenda aside and just listen, and then repeat back. Now we have to have the aptitude to be able to understand, right? We have to have the aptitude to be able to repeat back, right? I mean that's not necessarily easy, but if we can shift our focus there, I think that's really where we begin to elevate and to come full circle on the sort of the topic of conversation. That's how we begin to expand the perception of pre-sales. That's how we begin to expand the understanding and of this profession, of our role. It's how people experience our interaction. Are we focused on self? Are we focused on product, the features, functions, or are we focused on the others, right? The individuals that we're working with. So absolutely love that. Kalyani, again, let me just push pause, folks. I'm speaking to Kalyani Tavisala. She is a senior sales engineer with UIPath. We're talking about how to expand the understanding of pre-sales. So Kalyani, we've talked a little bit about, how can we help our sales counterparts sort of change their understanding? What are some of the things that we can do? What is your perception of how prospects and customers think of individuals in our role? Do you think we're viewed upon by prospects and customers as salespeople? Do you think they view us just as the technical experts that are going to demonstrate product? Is it somewhere in the middle? What has been your experience in that regard?
I think I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. For customers, my experience has been they are really looking to get their problem solved,
Yeah.
right? So, in what capacity you show up for them when they need you and how they need you is
Mm,
really how you make them successful.
mm,
And because we often interact with them during pre-sales, we are essentially playing the role of how can we ease your concern and how can we reduce that uncertainty
mm.
of making this decision or taking on this change, for your organization, right?
Yeah.
So, what are the elements and aspects of that position, of that engagement or conversation is really what the focus is, right? So, a typical thing can be something like, I have questions about your product, I have questions about your technology, right? So what are those specific questions, right? There's everything in the product, but what specifically are your questions is really how we need to, kind of train. And then once we are past that, we are then focusing on, okay, we have gotten past the questions around, the specific aspects of the technology itself. Now let's talk to how you're going to make this a reality within your,
Mm, love that.
right? So that's where, the tech part is over, but then you're really thinking about how can I help you make this a reality. And this, by the way, does not happen as in a one part conversation. This is something that pre-sales also is not shouldering entirely.
Mm,
This is where I think, again, is a perfect place for that cross-functional partnership to come into play. Sales or services teams or partners, whatever your delivery motion is, to essentially ease that uncertainty for customers, and in a way that sets them up for success, not just to
mm.
make the sale.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the words that I just wrote down as you were speaking are mitigate the risk,
Yeah.
right? We need to help them not only answer their questions, address their concerns, but there's always a risk involved in choosing a vendor or investing in a solution like any of the ones that most of us are selling. And we need to help them mitigate the risk that's involved, recognize that there's risk involved,
Yes.
help them mitigate the risk that's involved, and really help them think through how's this going to be successful. The other thought that came to mind is you're right. So, sometimes when we're working with prospects, customers, they're thinking about the solution maybe in too granular a manner, right? They're thinking a little bit potentially too much on function features or functions, or does it do this or does it do that, rather than the bigger picture. What is it going to take to make the success? What is it going to take to make you successful? What is it going to take to achieve what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And I've had a number of people in our profession say, Chris, I'm a little uncomfortable challenging my prospects and customers when I feel like maybe they're asking the wrong question. How do you address that? Because I'm sure you found yourself maybe fielding questions, and you might be thinking to yourself, folks, you're asking the wrong question, or you're looking at the wrong thing. How do we maybe challenge our customers to think a little bit more broadly?
Um, one way to approach it, and this is where my project management background and I wear the hat,
Mm,
say, we are so glad that you want to do this. If time wasn't a concern, cost wasn't a concern, you
mm,
can do everything. You can do everything, but we are here if you were to prioritize. And can you help me prioritize these for you? And if they say, well, all of these are important, then you might bring in another point of view saying, most often what we see customers starting with is
I love that.
here to go here,
I
right?
love that.
Always connect the dots.
Yes.
And then wait for the response. And usually, they'll be like, yeah, okay, maybe we can, do that.
Yeah.
In my experience, yes, again, whether it was a traditional project back in the day or even with customers, it's often the same thing. You want everything because you don't want to feel like it is going to limit you somewhere down the road.
Yeah.
But you only really realistically have the capability to do so much. And it's our job to help them focus on what that is.
And here's what I hear you saying, Chris. We need to at times sort of almost put our consulting hat on a little bit, and we need to guide them, right? We need to lead them towards success, particularly if maybe they're asking the wrong questions or they're thinking the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's okay. I mean, it's okay if they say, well, I think we want everything. Let's go for it. Right. And sometimes you might need to do that exercise of saying, okay, you asked for everything. Here's what everything is going to look like. And when you show the picture, sometimes it's faster for customers to wrap their heads around and say, okay, maybe not.
Yeah.
So you have to figure out the way to say, okay, we have the relationship here to guide them, say, okay, maybe not this way, or you're asking for this, we'll give you this, but know that this is realistically how things are going to shape up. And yeah.
Well, and again, I mean, you're sharing so many powerful words. The word that struck a chord with me is realistically, right? I mean, and again, this is a very fine line for sales engineers, because sometimes there are customers that will come to us and say, well, we want to do this, we're trying to do this, we're going to do this, and you're sitting there going, I mean, love the enthusiasm, but that's just not overly realistic, right?
Yes.
And so, but as a member of the sales team, as a member of the go-to-market team, right? And our sales counterparts are right there saying, well, don't tell them they can't do it because they want to spend money, right? So there's a fine line between being part of the sales team and ensuring the sale, but also thinking from a broader perspective and ensuring the customer success, right? And so we need to help them understand what's realistic in terms of, forget just our solution, just in terms of the overall project. We've seen this 100 times. Like we do this with customers. This is what's going to lead to success.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And these don't have to come as something doesn't need to be excluded in order to achieve this, right? We absolutely can do this, but given everything that we understood, given where you've shared your priority is, don't you think there is a little bit of a misalignment? And here's where we're seeing that misalignment, So another opportunity.
Yeah. No, it's great. Fabulous. Folks, I'm speaking with Kalyani Tavisala. She's a senior sales engineer with UIPath. Kalyani, I have believe it or not, we've been at this almost 50 minutes. So time always flies when we have these conversations. I have just a few more questions, and then I'll invite you to share one final thought, and then we'll put a bow in today's conversation. What do you consider to be the most challenging aspect of our job, of this profession?
Maintaining the beginner's mindset.
Oh, do you care to elaborate?
It is, I think we can, and I am trying to do this myself, is we know some things. We have a framework. How do we not fall into a pattern of doing the same thing? Right.
Love that.
So how do you bring that beginner's mindset to your work? And at the core of this, again, I think this is this is never going to go out of fashion, is listening. Um,
That was so well said.
yeah.
That
So
was so well said. Yeah, listening is never that may be the very best line you've shared. Listening will never go out of fashion.
yeah,
That's really good. But I also love this notion of having a beginner's mindset. And you said, because we get into a pattern of doing the same thing. One of the things that I have seen repeatedly, it's interesting. I think the first couple years of being in pre-sales, you're just sort of drinking from the fire hose, and you're
yes,
making lots of mistakes more than likely, and you're learning every day is sort of a new lesson to be learned, and you're just trying to figure things out. And then I think between sort of year 2 and 5, that's when people tend to really start to hit their stride, and they're really developing a groove. But from my experience, from 5 years, particularly 5 to 10 years, it's very easy to get complacent. And I
yeah,
think that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Like, we've been there, we've done that, we're pretty good at it, and it's easy to start falling back frankly, into bad habits because we've done it. We know what we're doing. We're good on our feet, and we'll figure it out. But I do think that we get into a pattern of doing the same thing, and that can be very detrimental.
yeah.
So, absolutely love that. All right. What do you consider to be the most satisfying aspect of this job?
The most satisfying aspect of this job for me is to have the ability to to have the ability to have so many wide-ranging conversations
Mm,
with customers, with internal teams, with and, and sort of try to approach my work through, you know, through that expansive lens, and not just say, okay, here's one thing that I'm going to do, and this one thing only,
yeah.
but how do I adapt to the
Mm,
changing landscape of things?
mm,
What I also love about pre-sales is that it's a perfect blend of people, technology, psychology,
mm,
process that I think does a lot for me. So
mm,
when I'm feeling like leaning a little bit more into the people side of things, I can do that. Go into
mm.
technology, I can do that. Yeah.
I love that. Well, and the word that I just wrote down is dynamic. The dynamic nature of this business. And you're right. I know when I was still in the field, like yourself, a sales engineer, it seemed like every time I thought I'd heard it all, every time I thought I had seen every angle, and I was in enterprise architecture, so that was my sort of particular domain and expertise. But every time I got to a point where I thought I knew it all, I'd have a conversation with a customer or a prospect, and they'd be trying to do something unique and different. They'd have a new approach or a different idea, and it just reminded me that there's always something new to learn, right? There's always that we're working with maybe uh an organization from an industry that we don't know anything about, and they have unique challenges that I've never even considered, right? So I'm with you. I love the dynamic nature of being in this profession. So fabulous. Kalyani, thank you so much for being here. Any final thoughts? The title here was, or the sort of the purpose of the conversation was to hopefully expand the definition of pre-sales. I hope we have done that to a certain degree. Any final thoughts in regards to, quote, expanding the perception of pre-sales?
I absolutely love the conversation. Again, thank you for having me. I think it's I love the format of unscripted, unrehearsed, right? It's because
And unpredictable.
and unpredictable, and I think that's what makes it that much more interesting, because you cannot prepare too much in advance. There's, you're responding, and that's the
Yeah.
best way. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to practice that. I was reading a book recently, and it talked about staying on the bus to continue to gather those experiences, right? So it gets hard. I know it's kind of a tough time, for some of us out there. I will just say that I feel extremely fortunate to have the opportunity to do this with an inspiring team where I'm at right now. I would just say, my thank you to the community, and let's stay on the bus, and let's continue to elevate each other through our experiences and learnings.
I love that. That's a great way to close. Stay on the bus. I love that notion of stay on the bus, even though at times the bus ride might seem a little bit bumpy, right?
Yeah.
Stay on the bus. Fabulous. Kalyani, thank you so much for being here. By the way, hang around backstage just for a minute after we break. To everybody else, folks, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to follow these, you can follow #TechSalesAdvice or Tech Sales Advisors on LinkedIn. Of course, you can go to techsalesadvisors.com to learn more about the work that we do. We'll see you next week. Kalyani, I wish you the best for the rest of the year.
Thank
Bye
you.
all. Cheers.